Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland on Sunday, the 14th of May. My name is Brian Liddy, and I'm pleased to say that I'm joined here in the studio today by Linda Fabiani. Linda,
Hi there.
hello, thank you for coming in.
Absolute pleasure.
And we're also joined today by Stuart McMillan, MSP for Inverclyde. Stuart, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks very much, Brian. How are you doing yourself?
Are you in Inverclyde at the moment?
Yes, in the spare room in the house.
Okay, great. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
So I'll just start today with our usual routine Ukraine update, day 445. Volodymyr Zelensky has landed in Berlin, according to a post on the Ukrainian president's Twitter feed, as he seeks to shore up support from key allies. Already in Berlin, Zelensky tweeted shortly after midnight on Sunday, arriving from Italy, where he met with Italian officials and Pope Francis. The German government has announced a further 2.7 billion euros of military aid to Ukraine, its biggest such package since the Russian invasion. Russian missiles struck Ternopil, the hometown of Ukraine's Eurovision entry, the music duo Dvorshy, during the song contest. Russian news outlet Kommersant reported on its website that 2 Russian fighter jets and 2 military helicopters had been shot down on Saturday close to the Ukrainian border. South Africa's presidential security advisor has said the country was actively non-aligned in Russia's war against Ukraine after US allegations it had supplied weapons to Moscow led to a diplomatic crisis. Volodymyr Zelensky said he had spoken to the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and urged him to implement Kyiv's peace plan to end the war. Ukrainian forces have regained at least a kilometre of territory in Bakhmut amid a Russian withdrawal that reflects Moscow's severe shortage of credible combat units, the UK Ministry of Defence has said in an intelligence briefing. Japan has expressed concern about Russian and Chinese military cooperation in Asia and believes the two countries are strengthening their joint exercises. Russian attacks injured 3 people in the southern Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv. Alexander Sienovich, the city's mayor, has said. A 15-year-old girl was among 2 people killed, while 10 more were injured in a Russian shelling attack on the eastern city of Kostianivka. I'm so sorry for these pronunciations. That's the Ukraine's defense ministry has said. An unidentified object that entered Polish airspace from the direction of Belarus was probably an observation balloon, Poland's defense ministry said on Saturday. Police in the Russian city of St. Petersburg have created an anti-drone unit after a suspected attack on the Kremlin last week. UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi plans to present an agreement with Russia and Ukraine on protecting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant to the UN Security Council this month to reduce the risk of a catastrophic accident from shelling at the Russian-occupied nuclear power station. So, Linda, I'll come to you first. Was there anything in today's update that caught your eye?
Well, I was a wee bit worried about the South African situation. When it was said that they were potentially allying themselves with Moscow. I really don't want to see anybody allying themselves with Moscow. There's a constant worry about Belarus, Brian, isn't there? And, I noticed the comment about it being a weather balloon that had come from that direction. I think what's striking me about this is the way that the war's almost becoming normalised. It's gone on so long, it's just the way of things, what's happening in the world, and interest tending to fade internationally. So good news that Germany has committed more weaponry. It just seems to be going on and on with no end in sight. We keep hearing about potential peace talks and then nothing comes of it. I don't know what's happened about the Chinese intervention, for example. Perhaps, I hope, there's talking still going on. So
yeah, that was mentioned quite some time ago, wasn't it?
Yes, it seems like
a
a
lot
long
of people
time
predicted
ago.
that it would be hollow, empty words, nothing would happen.
Well, yeah.
Stuart, what about yourself? Have you got anything that you'd like to say about the situation in Ukraine?
I mean, I agree with what Linda has just said there, but there's one other thing that just struck me, and that was also last night Eurovision was on, and the fact that the missiles struck the town of the Ukrainian contestants about 10 minutes before they went on stage. Now, it might sound like a flippant point, but I think kind of come back to what Linda just said a moment ago regarding the potentially feeling normalised. Last night was an example for me as to how serious the President Putin is in his ambition to do whatever it is he wants to do, and have absolutely no concern whatsoever about the consequences of what he's doing as well. Now, I mean, the Eurovision TV show, it's about entertainment. Some people like it, some people don't. But the fact that the Ukrainian act still had to go on and perform, knowing what had just happened to their town just beforehand, I just think for me that's an indication of the spitefulness of Putin, and I mean, anything that he's attempting to do in his illegal war against Ukraine.
Thanks, Stuart. And yeah, as you said, we will be talking about the Eurovision Song Contest. It's on one of the topics on today's show. So our first item to discuss, recently we had the coronation, where looted jewels from the British Empire were on full display, televised live around the world for everybody to see. The Monuments Men movie, the movie Monuments Men, was about the efforts to recover art and cultural artefacts looted by the Nazis in World War II. Is it now time for the UK to investigate the history of looting in the name of the British Empire and return any stolen treasures, such as the Koh-i-Noor diamond or the Elgin marbles? Stuart, what do you think?
Well, if you look back in Scottish and UK history, it's certainly littered with many shameful acts of atrocity, and also this type of example of looting. Now, I generally think that there has to be a thorough investigation of what has happened in the past. I know that locally, when a couple of years ago, I started a short life working group to look at Inverclyde's history, Inverclyde's links to the transatlantic slave trade. I know the type of engagement that I received. The vast majority was positive, I hasten to add. But there was also some individuals in the constituency and elsewhere who just tried to brush it under the carpet. So if it's the past, we need to move on. But we can't move on. We need to address the past. Now, we are not going to be able to rectify all the wrongs of the past. But we need to, first of all, attempt to understand fully the implications of what our forefathers and foresisters did. We have to accept that. We have to own it. So when we move forward, we actually are in a better place to do so. In terms of likes of the Koh-i-Noor or the Elgin marbles, going back, I think there has to be a genuine discussion about this, because that's just two examples. Of course, there are many, many others. I know University of Glasgow have started that process from some of their artefacts, but there has to be a genuine discussion about this, and it has to be open. And governments, both UK and Scottish institutions, universities, etc., have all got to be open to trying to basically take things back, allow things to go back to their original countries, because fundamentally, a lot of what Britain actually did achieve in the world has been based upon theft, and that is something that nobody can be proud of.
Thank you, Stuart. Linda, Stuart just mentioned there that he's looking into what items there might be in Inverclyde. I know that Glasgow museums, they've been quite good at returning artefacts. A dream shirt, I think, went back to North American
Yep.
Native Americans, and they've also got some Benin bronzes, which I think they're hoping to return.
Yeah.
But what do you think more specifically about what is in London, perhaps?
Well, my goodness, yes. I mean, Stuart's absolutely right. We have to recognise the past. We have to recognise bad things we did in the past.
The Earl of Elgin, he was a Scot who
Yeah,
brought the,
yeah.
the very
And well,
Elgin.
Scotland was implicit in what happened in the British Empire. We can talk about a lot of reasons for that. Of course, we can. We don't have time to do that. But the fact is that different nations and peoples across the world were either bullied into giving up some of their very precious things, or they were just point blank stolen. Now, the stuff about like the Koh-i-Noor diamond and other jewels, I mean, I have to say, I didn't watch the coronation, but even reading bits about it, you know, the crowns that go on the royals, full of what I would consider to be looted jewels. Mainly from India in that case, because it was at the time of the Raj when a lot of the jewels were looted. A lot of the jewels, including the Koh-i-Noor, were negotiated by the Brits, but the cards weren't exactly evenly stacked when it came to that. So, yes, I think we do have to have a proper discussion about that. I was delighted some years ago when Glasgow agreed to give back the dream shirt, the ghost shirt that meant so much to some of the Indigenous peoples in North America. There's many other items like that. And yes, of course we should have that discussion. We can have the discussion about transferring ownership and negotiating loans so that these things can be seen by other peoples across the world. But the ownership is absolutely crucial. The recognition of the ownership is absolutely crucial. And giving them back
Yes,
where required.
and a fulsome apology, I would expect as well. And before we leave this topic, it's as part of the coronation, Charles was made to wear a cloak of righteousness to give it its proper terminology, and yet they were. I thought they looked. I don't know if you both agree, but I just thought they looked idiotic in the regalia. It just did not look.
Well,
Right.
it's such an anachronism to me. The whole issue of royalty, the way it is, well, any royalty I find anachronistic, but particularly within England and therefore Wales, Scotland, and the north of Ireland, I just think the whole thing's ludicrous. The pomp and ceremony which is supposed to be celebrated, yeah, I think it's should be held up to ridicule. I mean, it was the thing about, I mean, I know it's off the subject, but the thing about how everybody was supposed to give this oath of allegiance or something of another. One hand, I thought it was laughable. On the other hand, I was outraged. You know, I suddenly felt as if we were back in serfdom. So, yeah, cloak of righteousness, that's a new one.
It doesn't seem to be working, if you ask me.
I suppose the victors write history and decide on what righteousness is. That's about time they had a rethink.
Okay, thank you, Linda. So the next item that we're going to discuss is crumbling infrastructure in the UK. Boris Johnson committed to building, was it 44 new hospitals, most of which have just turned out to be a lick of paint and maybe a wee bit added on at the side. St Helier Hospital in South London was one of those hospitals that were meant to be covered by Boris Johnson's manifesto. And there's a report came out to say that patients, doctors and nurses are enduring constant ward closures and flooding in dilapidated and unpleasant buildings because a new hospital promised by the government has still not been delivered. Its foundations are literally sinking, apparently. Linda, I'll come to you first. Were schemes like PFI designed to give an illusion of investment when the reality is that for years critical infrastructure projects in the UK have been in desperate need of upgrading?
Well, PFI, which became PPP, which was mooted by the Tories and then embraced wholeheartedly by Gordon Brown under a Labour government. I mean, that was an accountancy scam. It was about taking figures off balance sheet and making debt look less. And we're still paying the price of that today. Local authorities, health boards, Scottish Government are all paying a fortune for these ongoing PFI contracts. So, yeah, I think it was a bit of a scam. I think it was an illusion. And we're paying the price for it now. And then there's all these different projects that you see that come to naught. And what I would say, well, one of the ones, the high-speed rail thing started out, it was going to be something wonderful. Then Scotland was shafted yet again. And I understand the north of England's been pretty well shafted. Work has come to a stop. I actually drove through recently one of the areas that's, my goodness, it was like a moonscape where the high-speed rail is supposed to be getting installed. So there's an awful lot of good talk, like Boris Johnson's talk about the hospitals, that I understand are just, it was nonsense. And one thing I would say, and I'm sure Stuart will pick up on it, is I wish the mainstream press in Scotland would report better on some of this stuff, because all we get is the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, Scottish local authorities hammered about the health service currently. Some of it justified, and I'm not denying that. But we've been pretty good in Scotland on infrastructure projects like hospitals, like schools, and even to a large extent to roads that just gets forgotten. And we never get the comparisons about what the Scottish Government have been doing, or indeed the Welsh Government, in relation to what's happening in England under the UK Government. And some of the things that we're hearing are seriously bad. But to listen to the Scottish mainstream press and media, you would think that Scotland was the worst in the world when it came to these things. I would like to see a bit more pushing of how Scotland has done rather well in some things, and actually how bad things are south of the border. And that's not that I wish them to be bad for the English people. They're having a heck of a time with some of this right now, but a recognition of it, so that perhaps that appalling UK government can be forced in to not just making promises, but actually delivering.
Thanks, Linda. And Stuart, as a working SNP MSP in Holyrood, can you maybe give us a Scottish perspective then? Is there a difference between infrastructure spending north of the border and south?
I'll give you, excuse me, I'll give you a different example. I studied in France, Germany, and also in Sweden. And the time I had in these countries, I learned a great deal just in terms of how important investment into infrastructure actually is. And when I came back home after each of the visits, I always had a good look around my own area to try and understand more in terms of actually where are the opportunities, actually what can we show and what can we help, but also what can we learn from. And fundamentally, investment into infrastructure is absolutely critical in terms of an economy. Now, the money just transfers around the economy time and time again, and that is hugely important. And the fact there has been such a lack of investment in the UK for decades, not just with the P5 PPP, which Linda quite rightly ridiculed, but long before that. And we only have to consider as well the Lord Beeching's report about the cutting of rail. How clever was that report, and how stupid were the politicians of the day to actually go and implement that report as well? When we need to get more people onto rail, get more people using buses as compared to cars. So I think the short-termism that the UK has deployed over decades, doesn't matter whether it's been a blue government or a red government, they have both been complicit in an absolute abject failure of investment into the infrastructure across the UK. And I had a discussion with a constituent at a surgery on Friday and in Gourock. And the lady was touching upon a number of different issues, but one was the issue of Europe. I mean, I highlighted to the lady just in terms of also the cut of money that Scotland now has because we are now no longer in the European Union. I mean, you look at the examples of where European Union investment went in to help with infrastructure. Inverness is a prime example. Areas in the Western Isles, prime examples. And I just gave out those two examples. There are others, of course. And the reason why that money went in was because there had been such a lack of investment from UK governments consistently, decade after decade after decade. So it's clear that the UK have basically got a very little interest when it comes to investment into infrastructure. And certainly, in my opinion, and I'm quite sure Linda and yourself as well, Brian, the only way we can fully address this is actually with independence. So we get the full powers of finances, of borrowing, so we can invest. Because it's not just about investing to put debt onto the balance sheet. It's about investing so we can build a better country, so we can build better opportunities for present and future citizens of our country.
I think that's a really good point you make about the EU funding that Scotland has lost, and it seems to me that it's not being replaced to the same level by Westminster, even though they promised that they would. We've got what they call the Levelling Up Fund. Stuart, is there any examples of levelling up coming from Westminster to your constituency?
Yes, but quite frankly, £20 million coming in through levelling up, that's a drop in the ocean compared to what's required. I mean, just to give you an example of the Greenock and Inverclyde, Greenock Town Centre. I don't know if you're aware of it, Brian. Greenock Town Centre. You've got the A8, it then joins on to the Bellring roundabout, joins on to the A78. That road is actually operates as part of the roof of the shopping centre. Now, in all fairness, the road was there before the shopping centre, but it's caused a huge amount of problems for the shopping centre. But also, it's similar to Glasgow. It splits the town, where obviously the M8 splits Glasgow in two. This road does the same. So once again, well, the powers that be in the past taking this type of decision to put a road of such importance, a trunk road of such importance, to split through the town, just ridiculous. So the 20 million that's going to come, that will basically be, that's seed corn funding, because other monies are going to be required to actually to fix that particular issue, as well as other projects that are required. 20 million, to use a phrase, it will not cut it. We need a lot more. And the decades of a lack of investment into Greenock and Inverclyde, I mean, only have to look from 1979, with the decimation of the shipbuilding industry, shipbuilding and heavy engineering, and some of the work that did come in afterwards, some has still stayed, but some has obviously gone. But there needs to be a lot more in terms of the UK government saying sorry to the people of Inverclyde, and a lot more money to come in as part of that apology.
Thank you, Stuart. So I think we'll move on to the next item on today's show. Sir Keir Starmer would like to win back red wall voters in England by going further than Tony Blair's Clause 4 reforms, and declares if that sounds conservative, then he doesn't care. There's been responses to that from John Nicholson, and the First Minister Humza Yousaf. Humza Yousaf said that something along the lines of he had said previously that there was not much difference between Labour and the Tory parties at the moment, but now he says that it sounds like they're identical. And John Nicholson, again, I can't quite remember exactly what he tweeted, but it's well worth looking at what he said. Linda, what do you think?
I just get more and more stunned by Keir Starmer. I really can't see the difference these days between his policies and those of the Tories. The things that the Labour Party proudly talked about for years, he's not going to do anything about this awful right to protest law that has come in hammering folk. He stopped his MPs, tried to stop his MSPs from supporting folk in picket lines. Immigration, my goodness. I just think it's absolutely
Yeah,
appalling.
they're not
what
going
he's
to
doing.
repeal the illegal immigration bill.
No, and that conference that he spoke at recently, I can't remember who it was to, when he talked about clause 4 and steroids. He's going to go further than Tony Blair, do this, do that. I was just stunned by it. It was almost like a caricature. And
It reminded me of the Tories' muscular unionism, the phrase that they used to
my
use. But anyway,
goodness,
sorry,
yeah, I just find it absolutely stunning. And what really makes me wonder is, what do ordinary Labour members make of all this? And here you have this guy who never said any of this stuff before he got elected to the Labour leadership. And all of a sudden, he's this right wing, careerist, managerial type of guy. And at the bottom line of it, that I find appalling, is that it's like he doesn't stand for anything. The whole thing about oppositional politics and fighting elections is believing in something. And whatever anybody thinks about the SNP, even if they detest us and don't want independence, nobody can ever deny that the SNP is motivated by what they believe, what we believe will make the country better, the place better. Nobody can deny about the Greens, love them or hate them, that they have things that they stand for. Labour used to be like that.
perish the thought.
Lib Dems were never like that. Nobody ever knew what they stood for. The Tories, we know what they stand for. They stand for themselves. Labour, I don't know what they stand for anymore. And they must have ordinary members there that look at them and say, what are we about? Why are we in the Labour Party? And I find the whole thing absolutely stunning. I mean, the EU, I remember Starmer standing up in the House of Commons talking about how ridiculous it was that we were even thinking about leaving the European Union. And now he's not even willing to talk about the single market or even human rights in relation to European
He's going to make Brexit
Union
work.
policy. I don't believe Brexit can work to the benefit of any of the nations within the UK, I have to say. I mean, Stuart must see it locally, out and about. People that used to be Labour voters. I don't have that privilege anymore of being out and talking to the electorate in the same way that I used to have. But Stuart must have a real feel for what Labour voters on the ground are thinking.
Stuart, if you cast your mind back to, was it the 2019 local elections, which did include Scotland, unlike the recent one, and the SNP, tell me if I'm wrong, they got the biggest share of the vote in a lot of local councils, and yet what happened was Labour and the Scottish Tories teamed together to keep the SNP out, and I'm reminded of, was it in Stirling where Labour voted with the Tories to stop school children getting soup in a roll? So does this ring any bells with you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Melinda's right in what she said a moment ago. So these will be the agreements that Andy Salwar said wouldn't be taking place between Labour and the Tories. And I mean, Edinburgh as an example as well. The SNP did well in terms of numbers, but it's Labour in power with the support of the Tories and also the Lib Dems. So fundamentally, there is a situation that's now evolved in Scotland, whereby the pro-union parties will support each other if it's going to be to what they consider to be the detriment of the SNP. And fine, they're entitled to have that particular view. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's ludicrous, particularly when the SNP actually were the largest party in some of these local authorities. But can I come back to the fundamental point? I mean, tuition fees, asylum seekers, trade union legislation, the right to protest, Brexit, all of these things that the Labour Party in the past would have been front and centre arguing for the people. Labour have sold their soul. They sold their soul years ago. And with the situation we now see with Sir Keir Starmer, I mean, Linda's right. I mean, what does this guy stand for? He stands for nothing. It's only about power for the sake of having power, as compared to anything else. And I just view whether I view Labour and the Tories basically as the same party. The only thing that's different is the colour of the rosette. They seem to be mimicking each other, and this isn't a new thing. That's the thing. This isn't a new thing. This has been coming for some time. We have to remember the election. The election where Labour produced as part of their campaign tool was the red mug about immigration. That was and that was something really kind of caught the people by surprise. Certainly in Scotland, can't answer for down south, but in Scotland it did. And at the time, you could see certainly some Labour MSPs were extremely uncomfortable when that came out and the lines about immigration. So anything the Labour Party say, I will consider it with a huge pinch of salt, because when it comes to trying to support the people and support the population and make things better for the population, the Labour Party that is there now, in my opinion, for many, many years past, is it's a mimic of the Tory Party, and they've lost their way, they've lost their soul, and I'm not sorry about that. I'm not going to lie, I'm not. They've got to fight that battle internally themselves. But in terms of Scotland, the only way to actually try to protect Scotland and help Scotland is not to vote for any other party apart from the SNP. We need a strong SNP voice in Westminster, whilst we are still part of this discredited United Kingdom.
Thank you, Stuart. And you're right about that red mug. I remember when I saw that, I thought it had been photoshopped. I thought it was fake. I honestly didn't. I couldn't believe my eyes. But going back to Scottish councillors, Scottish Labour councillors, tell me if I'm wrong, but weren't there two councillors in Edinburgh recently that were they deselected because they refused to support the Tories? And meanwhile, in Aberdeen, maybe you can tell me if I'm wrong, Stuart, there was 9 Aberdeen Labour councillors who did side with the Tories, and yet I think they're still in post, are they?
I'm out of date with that. Stuart might know. But it seems to have been happening all over the country. Labour potential candidates, Labour elected people just get hammered because either they won't talk against Scotland's right to determine its own future. Perhaps they say, well, if Scotland wants independence, Scotland should be given the chance to vote for it. They just get hammered, deselected straight away. Yeah.
Stuart,
yeah, I think that. I mean, the Aberdeen 9. I think you're right, Brian. I think that seemed to have quietly just moved on, and folk were brought back into the fold from memory. I'm happy to be corrected. But Linda's point there regarding politicians, Labour politicians, who want the population of Scotland to decide, they are absolutely hammered internally. Some are deselected, and some are then we're kind of put back to the back benches, or just it's the guarantee that they're not going to be a candidate going forward. And that's, for me, that doesn't sound like a party that actually understands the definition of the word democracy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what's the by-election in Rutherglen, and Labour are sidelining the candidates that the local party would prefer and parachuting someone else in. I suppose that's yet to happen. So, do you think it's fair to say then that Keir Starmer is ignoring Scotland because he doesn't, or what could be seen as Scottish values, because he doesn't need Scotland to win the next general election, and he's going for the red wall rather than Scottish Labour votes?
I don't know. I think he doesn't actually understand Scotland. And I think that's a problem with a lot of them. They just don't get it. And that being the case, I think Scottish Labour, the branch office, has got a lot to answer for because they haven't been putting Scotland's case properly. So it's almost like we're not important enough for their leadership to ever actually look at properly and see the way forward. And can Starmer do it without Scottish Labour seats? Hard one. This time round, when they're talking about potential hung parliament and stuff. That then brings us onto the question of SNP support for a minority Labour government. Really interesting discussions, and I'm sure Stuart and his colleagues have all been talking about that quite a lot, but there's a lot of interesting times to come about that. So we'll see what happens. It's all very well Starmer standing up and bumping his gums about how it will be. I'm not so sure it'll be as straightforward as he seems to think.
Stuart, were you in the chamber in Holyrood for FMQs the other day, by any chance?
Yes, I was.
Can you maybe remind us what Anna Sarwar's line of questioning was? I seem to remember thinking it took a very, very, very long time for him to actually come to a question, and it read more like some kind of manifesto. You were there, so.
Well, it certainly did seem to be the opening salvo for a UK election. And if that's going to be the case every Thursday, then it's going to be a long election. But certainly he lost the room when he started to read out a whole set of figures in terms of popularity or not popular, in terms of Hamza and Anna Sarwar and others. And he just lost the room. I mean, Linda, I'm sure Linda will agree with this. I mean, Anna Sarwar is certainly, he is not an idiot by any manner of means. And he can get to a political point very, very quickly. But on Thursday, he was dire. And it was, it was fine to see, to be quite honest. But at the same time, he opened up so many opportunities for the First Minister to go back at him, which obviously the First Minister readily took up that opportunity, and it was great to see. But I just think if it is going to be the opening salvo for a UK election, First Ministers will become quite boring in the months ahead.
And I'll maybe just, before we move on to the next item, this thing about the Labour and Tory being two cheeks of the same arse, I think that's visible every week with Prime Minister's questions, with Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP in Westminster, when with one question he can spear both Labour and Conservative parties effectively as well, like not even just like slightly. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's better together in action, isn't it? You know, as Stuart said a couple of items ago, the unionist parties are one and the same now, and better together writ large, and that's going to be the way forward as far as they're concerned. It seems to me it's more important to Labour to hammer the SNP than it is to have a go at the Tories, which is an absolutely ridiculous situation when you see what the Tories are doing. But as I say, Scottish Labour have got a lot to answer for as far as I'm concerned, because I don't see any signs at all that they're sticking up for Scotland.
Okay, so it seems that we're agreed that.
Well, funnily enough, we're all agreed.
So the next.
Yeah, I think, Brian, just one very brief point for me.
Yes.
Certainly, electoral history at UK level shows that when Labour do win, they win because of votes in England.
Yeah.
It's not always because of votes in Scotland. So Labour need, if they want to win the next election, they need to win votes in England. So Scotland is very much secondary in their thoughts and their views.
Yes, it's true. We saw that recently with the polls that were showing that Labour was going to win the UK election, but without MPs in Scotland. And I wanted to fit in, haven't quite managed that. I wanted to fit in that thing about there only being one MP, one Labour MP in Scotland, Ian Murray, which means there's more pandas in Scotland than there are Labour MPs. But again, that same joke originated when when the Conservative Party only had one MP in Scotland. So again, it's another hat that they both seem to
They share an awful lot of things, yes.
What they do.
Yeah, so tomorrow it'll be 50 days since Humza Yousaf took office, and he seems to be taking the fight to Labour on policy. Can he recover lost ground by being upfront on independence? Linda, I'll ask you first.
I think Humza Yousaf has done really well over the last 50 days with everything he's had to contend with, and it certainly has not been easy for him. So yes, and he is taking the policy fight. I've been pleased to see some of the things that our First Minister is pushing on. Upfront and independence, I think he has already started to be. And I think that'll increase. I'm really looking forward to the party's national conference this year. I'm hopeful that we will see a way forward and that independence will be in the front of the agenda because we need it. Things are not going to get any better and for Scotland within the UK. It's horrendous at the moment with the Tories. But we're not even seeing any light at the end of the tunnel with the idea of a Labour government. You know, we've had that discussion, as you described it, Brian, to the same. I won't use your analogy. So we need independence. We need independence to make things better in Scotland. We need independence to show a bit of a light in the nations that make up the UK. So I really do want to see it front and forward. And that is also tying into the discussion we just had about electoral prospects for Labour, if it's a hung parliament and what they have to do. You know, talk of coalitions, talk of confidence and supply. I listened to a whole thing on BBC Scotland when I came in, talking about the potential of this. It was all about the Lib Dems, the SNP weren't even mentioned. And certainly there's a big discussion to be had in the SNP as well about the conditionality of any discussions that we would have with Labour. Because the way Labour are going now, it would look almost impossible that we could have discussions with them. I can't see a lot that they're pushing, unlikely to be in their manifesto, that the SNP could offer any comfort and supply on, I have to say. So it's all very interesting, but I think Humza Yousaf is leading from the front and he'll continue to do so.
Stuart, you've probably got the closest
Yeah.
seat. You know, you're in the chamber, you're in Holyrood, you're in the Parliament. Can you give us a kind of an insider's perspective?
Okay, it's. I mean, Linda touched upon there the issue of the first 50 days. It's not been easy, and it hasn't been. Nobody can deny that. Linda mentioned earlier on about the mainstream media, about PPP, PFI. But if you look at what the mainstream media have been like over the course of the last 50 days, but certainly also beforehand throughout the election, the leadership election campaign as well. So we know that there are very few individuals and organisations out there who will actually give the SNP a fair crack of the whip. If you look at what Humza has been doing over the last 50 days, he has led from the front. He has not shied away from the challenges that the party faces, and he has taken that head on, and I genuinely take my hat off to Humza for that. In terms of going forward with policy issues, also there's been a range of policy matters already been announced in the course of the last few weeks as well. So Humza started doing that particular part of the job as well. So it's not as if Humza has been sitting just waiting for things to happen. He has been out on the front foot. He has been taking the fight to the unionist parties and highlighting Scotland's and fighting Scotland's corner every single day, and he will continue to do that. The chamber is a different place at the moment, and it was always going to be a different place after Nicola left from becoming the First Minister. It was always going to be different. Every leadership change provides a different set of circumstances and different scenarios for the new leader. And the opposition parties, they're doing what they're doing, and they are opposition parties, so I find they're entitled to do that. However, I think it's fair to say that Humza's very much up for the fight, and Humza's actually taking the fight to them. And that's something that we in the SNP, not just the parliamentary group, but in the wider party, is something that we should be really pleased to see, and something that Hamza deserves to get the full support of every member of the party, because the goal is independence. It's not about existing devolution powers or devo max, whatever that may be. It's about independence. And the only way we get to become an independent country is with a strong SNP, and the SNP delivering that independence.
Thank you, Stuart. And so everyone in the SNP must be hoping that the live police investigation into party finances would end. But after 2 years, is it time for the police to put up or shut up? Linda, I don't know if you saw the headline. I think it was in the Sunday Mail today,
Oh,
which
no, I
said
didn't.
that the latest revelation is that the camper van was bought from somewhere in Birmingham and it was driven up by two men, and that's the top story, front page.
But that's great news, is it?
Yeah, camper van driven to Scotland from Birmingham by two men.
Well, it would have to be driven, and it would have to be driven by a man or a woman. So there you go. I mean, the whole thing strikes me as really bizarre. I mean, I'm not going to say too much because, as a member of the party executive, you know, I'm very aware that these things have to take their course. But it does seem to be taking a long time for anything substantial to be coming out. And is it 2 years already? My goodness. We haven't really heard much at all apart from wee bits and pieces that are coming from, I presume, the forensic analysis of accounts that the police are doing, forensic audit as they call it. Wee bits and pieces come out here and there about lady shavers, camper vans, pens. I don't know. I would like to see it come to a close. Of course I would. And I do keep thinking, and this comes from a position of no knowledge at all, I keep thinking to myself, if there was something big here, we'd know by now. So, yeah, the sooner it's over, the better. The sooner the police say their investigation is finished and the Crown Office decide what they're going to do, I think it'd be best for the country, not just for the SNP, but for the country to be able to move on.
Thank you, Linda. And Stuart, just again, maybe just briefly, is there an insider's perspective on that you can maybe share with us? I mean, again, it's live, you know, so we've got to think of what's the name of that law that we're not allowed to break. But is there anything that you can offer?
No, actually, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with Linda. I mean, the fact this has been on for 2 years, and there has been nothing of major substance or any substance, I would suggest. I think it's now the police are obviously attempting to be thorough, and I don't think anyone could criticise them for attempting to be thorough, because I mean we all want to have a police force that is actually that is thorough. So when they are investigating, then cases can come to court and be solid. However, 2 years, I think it's and 2 years and haven't found anything of great substance. I think it's dragging on, to be quite honest.
Do you know what puzzles me, Brian? I mean, this is about an investigation into donations, which I would imagine came largely from party members, etc. It's not public money. And I keep looking south at all the revelations have been about the waste of public money, about the diversion of public funds, about the potential of wrongdoing in putting out these public funds over the last few years.
Baroness Moan and the PPE
Well,
millions.
yeah, and I keep thinking to myself, where's the police investigation there? Where's the blue tents round Boris Johnson's door or Rishi Sunak's door or Liz Truss's door or any of that, or indeed Michelle Moan's door? Where's that? And I'm finding that really hard to square that circle, I have to say. But we're at where we're at.
It's a fair point. I'm interested, Stuart, to hear where you maybe think. Did you hear the news that Alex Salmond, the leader of the Alba Party, has made a call that all the pro-independence parties should work together for independence, which seems to make sense, but apparently he's got a problem with the SNP's cooperation agreement with the Green Party. Is that something that you've seen today, and is it something that maybe Humza Yousaf would? Where do you think he would stand on that, or what would he say?
Well, also, I can't answer for Humza in terms of the party, but I look at the last few years and genuinely feel as if, and I know I'm not alone in this, I feel as if that the Alba Party has spent the vast majority of the time just attacking the SNP and not attacking the pro-union parties, to be quite honest. And I think it'd be very difficult for any type of agreement to take place. But I think time will tell. But I think it'd be very difficult for it to happen.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to give a wee bit more time to the last item than we have in the running order, because I think it's got some potential. So am I the only person that watched Eurovision last night?
I have a
I watched
confession.
it.
Oh, did you? Well, I have a confession. I don't even know who won. Who won?
I think it was
Sweden.
was it Italy? Sweden?
Sweden?
No, it's Sweden. Yeah.
I watched it and I can't remember. But Stuart, I don't know if you agree with me then. So Glasgow didn't get to host it. It went to Liverpool. Fair enough. I thought most of the songs they all reminded me of other like old pop groups for the 80s and 90s, like Madonna or Aha or that Simply Red, and things like that. So that, I don't know. It's as if they were all composed by AI. And then I don't know if it was deliberate, but the last performance was Britain,
All right.
and I thought she was. Forgive me for saying this. I don't mean any offence, but she was like a poor man's Lily Allen kind of thing. And then straight after that, it went to Graham Norton and the BBC team, and it was like Brexit all over again. It was all Union Jacks and
Really?
we're going to win,
Oh.
we're going to win. But did you spot that, or is it just me?
I'm glad I didn't watch it.
Right, so it's I mean, I must admit, the UK song. I generally thought it was a lot better as compared to the points it got. I was surprised that Sweden won. I was actually, as I was watching it, I was talking to one of my pals who lives in Finland, because the Finnish entry, which came second, that was not a bad song, but it was typical Eurovision in terms of the group. But my pal did come back to me and said, well, he's quite happy to finish second Eurovision as long as Finland beats Sweden when it comes to ice hockey, and that was that matters a lot more compared to Eurovision. But I actually, I think it's one of these programs. I don't enjoy watching it, but equally I do, because I get frustrated, but also laugh in equal measure anytime I watch it. And my wife, we tend to watch it together, and we have done for years. And it's just a strange thing, to be quite honest. I have lost kind of touch with it, to be fair as well. Now, also because you've now got semi-finals and whatnot, so it's a whole week event as compared to just the Saturday evening. And it does look as if Liverpool put on a very good show, to be fair. And I think you're right, Brian, just in terms of after McMillan sang the song, that was always going to happen, whether we agree with that or not. It was always going to happen. But there were also some moments that actually highlighted the reason why it took place in Liverpool. And there was a particular scene where they shot to a crowd of individuals in Ukraine who were waving also Ukrainian flags. And the way that was done, I thought, was extremely touching. And it brought the seriousness back to the reason why it was being held in Liverpool. There was something else I noticed last night, and in terms of two of the presenters, one was obviously Ukrainian, and there's Alicia Dixon, and they tended to wear outfits that were either one was yellow and one was blue. And that seemed to happen throughout the evening, or various changes tend to happen, as we know, in a lot of these shows. But I just thought there was the continual narrative of supporting Ukraine, and this is about Ukraine, as well as being a television show. So I thought there were elements of last night actually were done tremendously well. Yeah, but as I said, it's one of these shows that's yeah, I laugh and get angry in equal measure as I watch the show.
Yeah, I think you're right about Ukraine. I was going to go on to that, just so that people don't think that I pan every single act. But I do think that the acts that were on in the interval were the best. I enjoyed them much more than anything else. And that thing about politics creeping in, I think my favourite was the 6 young women with the really long ponies. Was it Czechia? Can't remember what country
Czechia.
they represented, which I think was a reference to what's going on in the Middle East and women's rights there. But again, am I the only one that I thought Ukraine would win again so that they could maybe get a chance to host it next year?
Yeah, I thought, I must admit, I did think that, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, it's Eurovision. You can't forecast what's ever going to happen in Eurovision. I think
Yeah,
that's
and
one of
and this was the
the
first
joys
time.
of the show.
Yeah, and this was the first time that the whole world could vote. It wasn't just
I
European
am
countries.
stunned by you two sitting here talking to you.
Just-
being totally into Eurovision. My goodness.
I've been to a few
The things you
Eurovision
find out
parties in
about
my
people
time.
you thought you knew.
We can continue this down the pub, Stuart, if you want. I think that's us. We're out of time. So, Stuart,
Can I highlight just one point? So purely because of Linda Fabiani's attitude to Eurovision, when Scotland becomes independent, I think Linda should be our representative.
Oh
First
my
time
goodness.
Scotland had no
Neil
representative.
one.
I've heard you're a good singer, Linda.
Absolutely.
and thank you for reminding us, because that was the actual question: was who would you get to represent Scotland in an independent
Yeah, well,
nation?
I don't know if he'd be willing, but for me it would have to be Paolo Nutini every time.
Okay,
Yeah.
Stuart, you said Linda, but who would our backing group be? Maybe.
Oh, backing group. Maureen Watt would be there. And let's see who else. Okay. Let's go for Nicola.
Okay. I'm just going to go for Annie Lennox. Annie, if you're listening, you've got my vote. So that's it. Stuart, thank you. To Stuart, thank you, Linda, for giving up your valuable Sunday. So hope to see you both again, and for your valuable thoughts as well.
No problem. Thanks very much, Brian. Thank you.
So that's it for this week's Full Scottish. But before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view, you know that. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Right now, we have a pressing need to raise £30,000 to pay our bills and ensure that we are able to continue making programmes. But in the meantime, again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week on here in Broadcasting Scotland. Bye.